Right. Again, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Excellent. Well, good to see everyone. Welcome to a new month. What a long year March was. I am Jeremy Eller, Senior Product Designer for Front End and UX Foundations, and that's a new team. I will go into that a little bit at the end of this. Let me get back over here. All right. So there's three things I was going to kind of address today: color, Figma, and foundations. So three kind of massive things that are happening, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of break that down pretty concisely. I will, let's start with talking about color. A lot going on with color. So a little backstory. This is me a few months ago hiking up Palette backcountry, about to unleash a color avalanche on the product below, right? So you know, excited to be working on color and kind of to dive in and assimilate a lot of things that were going on. And this is us today, right? I love the new accessible brown. Said no one. So let that sink in a little bit. But anyway, a little backstory with the beautification UI epic. What I started to notice was a lot of patterns with color, and a lot of the issues were related to both accessibility and color. So decided to really branch those off into a separate effort that would require kind of its own work apart from the beautification epic, right? It would take some upstream thinking to solve in one place for color so that we could then translate it and begin to solve all of these other issues. And there were many of them. As you can see here, there's 25, and that's just for the accessibility ones. There's many others that are kind of come out of that. So let's go into business goal because there is a huge one tied to this. For one, accessible UI. And the second part of that is to have WCAG 2.1 AA compliance. This is massive because this goes into our VPAT, which is our voluntary product accessibility template. And many like government educational users will actually require a VPAT with WCAG 2.1 AA compliance in order to use the product. So current state today, color is listed as not supported for contrast. And being able to adjust color and do that allows us to have compliance in there, which gets our VPAT closer to 100% passing grade, which makes it easier for government and other organizations to actually use the product and be able to sign off on it. So it does have a positive business goal attached to it. Customer goal would be to have sufficient contrast and distinguished colors. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but it's really important that users are able to A, identify items in the UI, and B, to assimilate meaning from those colors where we use them and such. There's 6 constraints that I'll list. There's many others, but the key ones that I experienced going through this, first off, is that variables in GitLab styles, SCSS, they sometimes override variables in GitLab UI, but not always. So it's very tricky to identify when you make changes, what is going to be changed and what isn't. Another one is that orange and green hues, which we use extensively for status and meaning and actions, they're very notorious and difficult to maintain like a vivid quality with the color while meeting contrast ratios. So, you know, on one hand, we increase the contrast ratios to satisfy WCAG. The other side of things is that when you increase that contrast, those hues tend to get darker, which makes it actually tougher for users with red-green color blindness to distinguish those. And so, you know, there's impact there. And kind of anecdotally, you know, I've talked to others in the accessibility community, and they're like, you either use a really large font or you don't use these colors. So we have some good problems to solve from here on out, and that's going to be one of our next steps. The third constraint is just that the prolific use of color combined with dynamic content, feature-rich capabilities, makes it very difficult to test every scenario. So every type of status, every type of badge and label, buttons, everything, it touches everything. And so it's very difficult to test for every use case. Number 4 is testing a work in progress merge request from GitLab UI in the GDK is not really easy. So it makes it more difficult to assess impact. We can test it kind of in the confines of GitLab UI, but then understanding the upstream impact of the product can be difficult. And there's an issue linked there as far as how we're going to go about rectifying that. 5 is just evaluating contrast ratios for each color step against multiple surfaces. And when I say surface, I mean like the background colors that we use in the UI. And then on top of that is normalizing those same steps across hues. And I'll discuss what that looks like. So first, here's kind of what it looks like to take a look at all the contrast values against the surfaces. So for each step in a hue, we have to evaluate the contrast level and make sure it passes in those different circumstances. And in that way, we can create normalized rules of, you can always use a 500 value against a 50 value and meet contrast regardless of hue. So the ability to be able to do that is very helpful. Here's an example of what it looks like to normalize, right? So we take a grayscale view and we see, okay, are the steps, is the gradation equal across hues? There's slight variance, but we want to get as close to that gradation as possible. And then the last constraint is preference. Color is subjective, and it's one area where in a product you experience the subjectivity meeting the objective rules of actually needing to pass and have contrast. So preference is something that we really experience a lot of collisions with, and that leads to this, right, where it's just you kind of peek over the edge and it's like, oh, that's a lot, but that's okay. It's a good problem to solve. So out of all that led to a lot of exploration and building out different issues to track things anywhere from adding purple to our primary UI palette so that we had an additional color to pull out some different meaning that we might not have today, to working on a palette specifically for data visualization, to working on actually working through our existing palette and determining meaning, all the way to normalizing our grays and considering surfaces, planning for dark mode, dark theme, etc. So a lot of stuff happening there. Here's just a snippet of a bit of exploration. Here's what it looks like, as I started to assimilate that and work through kind of before and after and look at the trends, look at the change to see how colors are moving until we get to today's state, which is implementation in Figma, where we actually have a full document where you can see the colors, the contrast ratios. Makes it pretty easy. And I'll just jump over here really quick to color. One of the things that we're able to do in Figma is actually have, I'll turn my layers back on here, the ability to kind of toggle the ratios really easily for all of our hues, and that makes it just kind of a nice little tool within that. So little side note, get back over here. And then we also have a new data viz palette, and this is also documented in Figma. I won't go too much into this today, but it addresses different types of data, so sequential, categorical, divergent, and how we can leverage the new color palette in that, along with sequencing, so that we can kind of maximize color contrast when you have colors next to each other, so that colorblind users can differentiate data points, etc. So current state, we have 190 color variables. We have a new data viz dedicated color palette. It's not documented in pajamas yet, but it will be. We do have purple as a new hue option. We have normalized steps so that we have similar contrast ratios across hues, which will make it more predictive to use color with states and other things where we could say, regardless of the button type, you're always going to use 500 for the rest state and 700 for the active state, etc. And then something new that'll be in the product this week is leveraging default in GitLab UI for our SCSS overrides, which means that GitLab UI will prescribe default color variables, but then the product will be able to overwrite those variables. And so many of the changes that we're seeing today that have been problematic with orange looking more brown should be reverted until we can address things on a case-by-case basis. So next steps, I'm going to remap color variables in the actual GitLab SCSS to make sure that they align with the new properties. Evaluate variables instance by instance, component by component. Explore other areas where we could use color in better ways. Hopefully work towards updating the VPAT to show support status for contrast. I want to be able to address all the issues in the accessibility, color palette, and use epic so that we can close those out and keep moving forward. Eventually communicate all changes in a larger blog post and then continue to iterate. So a lot happening there. That's the end of the color section. Let's see here. It looks like we're good on time. I will save any time for questions at the end, and I'll start talking about Figma. All right, so for those of you that don't know, we're migrating from Sketch to Figma for our primary design tool. And there's many reasons for this, but here's some of the top ones. We really want to choose a tool that aligns with everyone can contribute. Right now, Sketch is Mac OS only. It is virtually desktop only, where Figma is something that is kind of more platform agnostic. It's browser, it's desktop. And so it's a little more open, and we'll see I guess some of the benefits of that with community contributions and even our own workflow. Just the next point, we will be able to streamline the design workflow. So rather than checking out a branch, creating duplicates in Sketch, pushing that up, you'll be able to essentially make a change in Figma, publish a draft, share it, and be done. So a lot of that back-end workflow will be eliminated. We'll be able to provide more visibility to in-progress work. So just by nature, when we have public projects or team projects in Figma, you as another designer will be able to go in, or PM or anybody will be able to go in and view those design files, kind of in flight if possible. And what that does is allow you to see the changes real time, to experience what's going on, and to be able to async, pop in and see what's happening, rather than look for a post or something being pushed to the current repo. Second to last, we'll be able to simplify async and sync work by working in one file, leaving real-time, commenting actually that's design, like contextual to the design. So right now, leaving comments in an issue for a designer is sometimes problematic, just because those comments tend to be separate from the actual design. So you have to kind of mentally map, this comment relates to this part of the design. With Figma, we'll be able to have that pinpoint accuracy of what a comment applies to. And then sync work, since there's kind of a collaborative mode in there where everybody can actually work in there together real time, and you can see what others are doing. It's very helpful. And then the last item in purpose is just to be able to promote open source design. So it's something that we're actually sharing our files out to the public. Even with icon library, eventually want to be able to publish our thinking so that others can use it, learn from it, and we can contribute back to the greater design community. Current state. So we have the Pajamas UI kit established in Figma. There's many patterns, templates, etc. There's 21 of the 37 components that we've identified are complete, and there's several more that are in a state of review that should be done in this milestone. We have over 7 team members that are working towards component and other design parity with what exists in Sketch today. And then we have user licenses, which are being worked on in procurement. We've got new issue templates in review. So if you're wanting to create a new icon, a new illustration, et cetera, it's going to be relevant to Figma and that workflow. We do have contributing documentation linked there for team members and the greater community. Design specs are starting to link to completed Figma designs, and we have a Figma Slack channel. So a lot of things happening around the Figma ecosystem. Here's an example of the Figma board where we're actually tracking some of our issues and milestone. You can link to that in the top right corner. Here's what our public profile looks like. So I mentioned the community aspect of it. We're part of the community beta where GitLab actually has our own profile in the Figma platform where others can actually search for our resources, or if they're searching for UI kit, other things that I've tagged, they could come across our designs and learn from it. They can use it. The advantage to this is also for community contributors. If they want to contribute back to the Pajamas UI kit, they simply have to duplicate this file into their own Figma drafts, make changes, and share it with us to review. So it makes it very easy for them to do that. So some of the challenges that we've had as we've migrated from Sketch to Figma is just first determining single source of truth. It's very difficult sometimes to determine, is Sketch the latest, is the product the latest? And so it's taken a little more friction to kind of create parity with what's in Sketch today. Another thing is component dependencies. So for example, you have to complete icons and avatars before breadcrumbs can be done, because breadcrumbs leverages both of those items. We're uncovering new questions and considerations that need addressed, like states, help text and forms, etc. Timing and scheduling, just for creating and reviewing, since everybody is part of stage work and working on their own projects, being able to devote time to this while learning a new tool and a new workflow is a challenge. And then lastly, just feature parity and a learning curve from Sketch to Figma, identifying, do we need plugins? How do you, what are the terminology? There's just a lot around that we've worked through as challenges. Next steps, we're going to attain full parity with what exists in Sketch today, update GitLab design, Pajamas, handbook docs, complete the issue templates, address workflows. We'll set up office hours. We'll have 2 time zones so that people can pop in and we can work through that. And then get the licenses purchased for the team so that we can work through that, get other designers acclimated to the product. So that's a lot. So time for cursor high five. For those of you who are used to using Figma, you'll understand that. And if not, you'll soon get to take part in that. Okay, so I'll catch my breath. That's a lot on Figma. And then lastly, I'll move to foundations. All right. So foundations is a new category and a new team. And Tori, feel free, or Jarek, feel free to jump in and kind of add any color to this. But if you were to look at where we are, we're a category, front-end and UX foundations, that reports up through the ecosystem group. And another way to put that is that it's under the create stage under the development product section. So I'll leave that there in the slides. I won't unpack any of that, but that's just an idea of where kind of we fit in the scheme of things. I didn't put this in the slides, but Tori, Jarek, and myself are the designers, managers that are going to be working on this team. Tori will be managing, and it's exciting. So we actually just had our first team meeting last week to start to lay out where we want to take the team, what we want to do with it. Here's kind of a little capture of some of our documents as we worked through the meeting, some of the things that each of us wanted to see happen as part of the team. And ultimately, just to summarize it, the front-end UX foundations team is going to be responsible for leading the direction of the experience design, visual design, and technical tooling of the GitLab product. And it's important to note that it's going to focus on 2 things. It's focused on tooling and user-focused enhancements. And this is probably the most critical piece, right? Is that front-end and UX, although will act as kind of a centralized resource, the arrows point both ways, right? So this is not a dictatorship. It's not a top-down type of a workflow, right? We're here to work across all teams and all groups and to contribute to the design system, and then also to help triage large-scale, like technical and experience problems. So it's very much a collaborative approach, so that it's inputs, outputs, and not just one team making decisions. So want to really emphasize that this is a collaborative effort, everybody is still, encouraged to contribute to the design system, to be designing new components, to be, kind of pushing the envelope on the design of the product and thinking through that in a design and systems mindset. So what are we doing initially? We're really focused on shepherding the create, build, and style phases of the 36 foundational components. There's a link to what those are. There is actually 4 phases of the implementation of a component. We're focused on the first 3. And then also shepherding the migration from Sketch to Figma. What we're not doing is building and integrating all components across GitLab. So that's kind of that 4th step of a component, is the actual build and integration. And we won't be doing that. It's fully expected that teams and other designers, engineers will be helping to implement and get those integrated, simply because there's so many ways and places to get those components added to the product. It would not be possible for this team alone to do that. So that leads us to what we're looking at kind of long-term. First to be creating a comprehensive action plan for integrating components into the product so that we can kind of help foster that process and help shepherd that process. Auditing and updating our existing VPAT that I mentioned earlier in color, so that we can look through and see what areas do we really need to focus on for accessibility in the product, which leads to the next point, is building comprehensive accessibility standards into our workflows. So we really want to make sure that those workflow standards are in place at the start, so that they're not an afterthought and it doesn't provide any extra friction at the back end or hold up anything getting released because we've already thought about it. And then something for later is building out a dark theme or dark UI. That's something that has been out there for a long time, and there's a lot of emphasis around it. There's some other work that we're doing with the web IDE around it. And so we want to be able to have kind of a holistic mindset and goal towards that and approach. So that is the end of that section. I will pause and open it up for any questions if anybody has any.
That was beautifully done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Curious, Jeremy, how much collaboration have you had with brand and marketing or other designers in the organization?
That's a great question. When I first started, one of the individuals that I first connected with was Luke Babb, who is on the marketing team. And I've been working with Vic Bell, who does illustration, and then our own Shane, who moved over to that team as well. So quite a bit of collaboration with the brand team, and anytime something comes up that is part of that visual aspect or where they want to take things, we're definitely looping them in. Good question. All right, well, I just want to say thanks. I missed out on having the nice thank you slide with the Tanuki as the O. I apologize. I will have that for next time. So.